Welcome to Sound Financial Decision Making, a webcast presented by AARP. I'm Kyle Woody, founder and executive director of Jack's Caregiver Coalition. Our vision is a world where guy caregivers never feel alone, and our mission is to improve the way that guys think, feel, and act through every phase of their caregiving journey. On behalf of everyone at Jack's, we're grateful for the opportunity to bring you together with our panelists in celebration of National Caregivers Day. Our goal today is to help caregivers find answers, advice, and support from Minnesota attorneys, brokers, on their family's financial goals, questions, and barriers. In addition to that, we hope to inspire 22 donations to our coalition to help us produce more content like this, and to help us keep bringing caregivers together. I can tell you from personal experience, our gatherings are about more than the emotional support that community brings. They're also about sharing practical and tangible lessons learned with each other, just like the lessons we're sharing with you today. This is the first webcast in a series of many, each focused on a specific challenge that all caregivers face. Today's topic is a deep rabbit hole that we're merely peering into for 30 to 45 minutes. As you're watching, we encourage you to reach out to us in the comments of the social media platform with your questions and concerns. And you can also reach out directly to our panelists, the one that you feel is best equipped to help you. And speaking of panelists, now it's my privilege to introduce you to our all-star cast. First up, we have Lindy Jokanovich, founder and executive director of Cancer Legal Care. We have Dustin Cesarek, a fellow founder of Jack's Caregiver Coalition, an attorney, and owner of North Star Legacy Law. And we have Ryan Brockhaus of Northwestern Mutual Wealth Management Company. For a deeper dive into their backgrounds, we've posted all three of their bios on our Facebook feed, so you can check that out. Experience tells us that the best way to face any new challenge is to seek out the best questions first, rather than the right answers. The best questions lead us to the best answers. So our approach with this webcast was to give this panel of experts a scenario and ask them, what questions should we ask you? We set the stage for the scenario by giving our panelists two things. One, we shared with them why, of all the challenges that caregivers face, of all the challenges that we intend to tackle on future webcasts, why did we start with this one? Because life has been sped up for so many young guy caregivers and their families. The what if can no longer be put off. We wanted to know what financial and legal conversations need to be focused on and prioritized when young families are facing advanced cancer diagnoses and end-of-life decisions. And two, we shared with them a caregiver story for them to consider, a story that is colored by many of the stories of the caregivers that we've served at our coalition, a story that is also heavily colored by my own experience as a caregiver, a story that we hope at least parts of will resonate with all of you. The story goes like this. As a caregiver with kids, I am constantly faced with reconciling two realities. One, my wife is living on borrowed time. And two, I will be providing for my kids long after she is gone. It's likely that no amount of money is solving this problem in time for her. I remain hopeful that we can buy her more time, but it feels like if we're successful with that, we'll be bankrupt. If a promising treatment comes along that could save her, it doesn't matter what our budget is. We're doing it. And if she's feeling well enough to have one last trip with her babies, it doesn't matter how much that costs. We're doing it. Yet I lay awake at night worried our kids will pay for this budget-free attitude, and that they won't have college funds. I won't be able to help them buy their first car. I won't be able to help them put money down on their first house. And at the end of it, I may not have anything left in my retirement account or savings or equity in my home. And maybe the scariest possibility of all, that I could easily become a financial burden to my children later in life if I outlive my ability to work, I outlive my retirement savings. And I was raised on the principle of 80-10-10. Live on 80% of your income, save 10%, give away 10%. But the math no longer works. Our income has been cut in half, and our medical costs are impossible to predict. I'm terrified of opening the mail for finding another insanely huge medical bill. Lindy, does that sound like a situation you've encountered at Cancer Legal Care?
You know, Kyle, hearing you read that, listening to your voice, it's all too familiar. It's all too real for the thousands and thousands of people who we have helped at Cancer Legal Care over the last 14 years. That scenario is almost word for word, certainly feeling for feeling, exactly what we encounter. For the caregivers who contact us, for the patients themselves who contact us, it's those worries, it's those fears, it's those everyday realities that they are all of a sudden facing from they never imagined that they would be. That their life is suddenly turned upside down with the diagnosis, that they're wrangling with all the decisions they have to make with the diagnosis, and all of the financial and legal issues that come up as a result of it. And I think so many of us believe that there's a safety net with the insurance that we have and the benefits that we have, but all of a sudden when we have to avail ourselves of those things, it's the paperwork, the aggravation, the uncertainty of where to turn for help is absolutely paralyzing, because we don't know where to go. We don't know what the answers are. There's so many confusing terms, and all of a sudden it's just us alone, and we feel so alone in doing it. And we, not many of us use an attorney in our lives. We don't know how much it costs, and that's the reason why I founded Cancer Legal Care, because of my parents' experience, and why all of us on the board of Cancer Legal Care and our volunteers and our staff all do this work, because of their own experience. And so, to answer your question, yes, and it doesn't have to be this lonely experience. And I just encourage people to please reach out to us, because that's why we do this work. It is a calling. It's why we dedicate our lives to helping people in this situation, because there is so much help. And I know that's why Dustin is doing this and why Ryan is here, because we want to help and sort of break down those barriers that keep people feeling this alone in this really, dark situation. Because there is help. I mean,
yeah.
Don't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I just thinking about, from the scenario you read, and like the pile of bills that just keep piling up. So, I was a cancer caregiver for almost 10 years to my wife, and she passed away last June, and she was the one who managed our finances for us. She paid the bills, like she kept the checkbook, kept up. And when she died, there was literally a stack of mail that hadn't been opened that was like 3 months old. Mm-hmm. And so like the first week after she passed away, I had to sit there and open up every single thing, and bill after bill that was just, 90 days late, 3 months late. And it's like, wow, like what do I do with this? And so I think just the idea of how important it is to proactively start thinking about some of these things, especially early in a diagnosis when things are still relatively stable. It's, there's a lot of grief happening and a lot of transition but the sooner you can connect with a community, the sooner you can connect with advisors who can help you with some of these questions, the better. And I think of, in terms of estate planning, it's never too late, it's never too early. Once you turn 18, you should have an estate plan at the end of the day. But if you're dealing with a situation where you get, a diagnosis and all of a sudden we created our wills 15 years ago, or we've never sat down to do that, it's time to do it. At the end of the day, especially if you're dealing with a diagnosis that potentially has cognitive issues involved, you can create an estate plan, you can sign a will, you can create a trust, so long as you have capacity. So if you're concerned about potential cognitive decline, then you need to get into an office sooner and get that plan put in place. The risk of, I guess one way that I think about it is, you're living your life, you're building up assets, you're creating memories with your family, but so much of estate planning is focused on your stuff, but you're more than your stuff. You're not just the assets and the money that you have. You're a life, and how do you want to be remembered, when your time comes and you pass away, and the way to put that down is to create an estate plan. So I think about just how important it is to proactively sit down, find your advisors, put together a will, if you can, if you have the interest and the ability, create a trust if you have young kids. But it's all so dependent. You really just need to find those people who can help educate you and kind of help you get to that point to where you can check that off your list. And I don't know, I know that for me, one of the first advisor that I connected with was a financial advisor, even before we had our estate plan. And so I would be glad to hear about Ryan's experience meeting those new clients.
Well, it's interesting because last year I work in the profession of financial planning, and my father was dying of COVID, and you feel like your family's taking care of it. And I remember when they said he has a 15% chance of living, I had the same concerns, just from a little different lens, where I was calling my attorney. I was figuring out medical bills and how does that work, because he was going out of network. I was thinking about, is my mom taking care of if medical bills wipes out any of the assets? And that's where I think about from a proactive financial planning piece. Number one, communication's the key between spouses, right? A lot of times, and I'm guilty of this, sometimes as spouses, we don't want to talk about the hard issues or the messy issues, right? Mm-hmm. But communication frees you up, and when there's full transparency, things just work. Even with your kids, I know that was the hard part with my father last year, was the lack of communication, where my sister and I didn't know what was going on financially. So then we're coming from behind on that. And even communication with your parents. So we shared our estate plan, so if anything happens to Katie and I, they understand, here's our charitable giving, here's what we want our legacy to be. So I think communication's the key. Second piece is, and I'll echo what Dustin said, is having a strong team around you of trusted advisors. I know that what we've heard from clients is that it creates clarity and confidence, and you don't have to have all the answers. Mm-hmm. And it's just this freeing emotion is when you can call Dustin, hey, how is this going to work, or how do I process through it? Lindy, how do I process through this? What are your thoughts here? It's just a very freeing way to have confidence when it's a tough topic to talk about. The third piece, and I learned this last year, but one of the things that gets neglected is account titling and account beneficiary alignment. So, when it comes to taxable investment assets, a lot of spouses have separate assets. That's an issue if for some reason they can't make decisions, right? So there's 3 different ways that you can title accounts typically, if it's liquidity accounts or brokerage accounts. One is going to be transfer on death. So if I have a transfer on death account, my wife Katie cannot access that without me signing off on it. So if I can't make decisions, she doesn't have any liquidity to that account. So with married couples, we want to make sure it's typically jointly held property. That way both spouses can access a liquidity bucket.
When you liquidity,
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Easily convertible to cash where I can touch it without penalty.
Okay.
So that could be a great question there. I'll start here and lead it off. But when I think about someone dealing with a terminal illness, right, where my head goes first for liquidity is, number one, checking my disability. How do I make a disability claim? Do I have waiver of premium on my life insurance so that the insurance company now pays it? What do I have through my employer? I know, Lindy, you'll talk a little bit more about that. The second piece is, to the liquidity point, cash, checking, savings. However, a lot of clients, as they're growing their asset base, they don't have a ton of liquidity because they have kids, they have conflicting resource demands. A third area we talk about for liquidity are cash values inside life insurance. Typically, there's provisions where you can touch the money early without penalty. So it's another bucket. We also talk about, do you have a home equity line of credit? Can you attach a line of credit to your taxable investment account? A lot of times you can do that. And then if as a last case scenario from a liquidity standpoint, there's provisions within qualified retirement accounts to do loan features, early withdrawals. That's kind of the last step. But Lindy, I would love to hear more, because I was asking this question right before this, is, between disability benefits, Social Security benefits, I mean, it's complex, and I work in the world. I would love if you had any thoughts or comments as I share that.
Yeah, it's very complex and it's very overwhelming, and I think most people are just terrified. And in estate planning, nobody wants to do estate planning. I mean, isn't that right, Dustin?
Yeah,
I mean, nobody wants to do estate planning. I mean, nobody says, gee, I can't wait to just go and do all this planning for the end of my life. I mean,
can't
nobody.
Wait to go to the dentist.
Exactly, nobody wants to do this, and so it's usually comes about because there's been a diagnosis or a divorce, or a decade or more has passed, or there's been a death in the family. So it really is usually an event that spurs a person or a couple on to do this. And so, and it usually takes a long time. I mean, they go see an attorney, and then, it takes a long time to get the documents signed. So it is, even aside from cancer, it takes people a long time to do this. But I will tell you that it really does buy you a big peace of mind knowing that your family is taken care of and that you've made your decisions known. So it is, and each document does, there's no multitasking really in estate planning. Each document does one thing. A healthcare directive gives a decision to make your health decisions to somebody else. A financial power of attorney speaks while you're alive to make your financial decisions to somebody else. A will after you pass. So each document does a separate thing. So that's why it's overwhelming, because there's so many different documents, and then each for a different financial transaction. I mean, there's so many documents. But just to what you said, Ryan, that you don't need to know all the questions and you don't need to know all the answers. You just need to have a Ryan or a Dustin on your team, so that when you are lying awake at night with a million questions keeping you awake, you don't have to do that anymore. You can know that you can just say, oh, that's a Ryan question. I'm just going to write it down and I'm going to ask it to Ryan and have Ryan figure it out for me. And so, I just can promise you that, it's 100 times worse to just have all this baggage in your head and weighing on your heart than actually getting to the person on your team and finding the person to ask these questions of so that you can get the answers that you need. And there's so many of them, and that's what's so stressful. And so it's, and the thing is that you don't know you're going to need all these answers until you need them yesterday. And so, you know, people don't have all of the information from your HR department, you know, about all your benefits. Really, when you start, you get all this information, you sort of tuck it away or you lose it. But, you know, that's a really great place to start, is to get all this information from your HR department about all your benefits and get all of that information. And also from your insurance company. You don't just want the you know, the 15-page PDF about what your insurance plan covers. You want the full summary plan description, it's called, and it can be 50 to 150 pages long. I mean, you want to get an arsenal of all of these documents ahead of time, so that you have all of the benefits that are available to you. And you know, this is something else that you can do, is enlist somebody to be your, you know, your recording secretary, for lack of a better word. You know, for all the people who are asking, like, what can I do to help you? You know, to save yourself from yet another lasagna or a loaf of banana bread, like, find somebody who's really good at details and that you trust to go through your paperwork and have them assemble all these documents, go through that pile of mail and get rid of, you know, open the envelopes, get rid of all the extra papers that come with it and sort the bills into piles. I mean, get these documents and just put things in order for you, because I mean, that's what you need. It's a lot of paperwork. And
I love that.
I mean, and that is something, I mean, people want to be of help, and I mean, it's
time.
hard coming up with ideas, am I right? I
Well,
mean,
you know, you've got a dairy allergy, but you're getting all these lasagnas.
Right.
It's great, but something like that is so much more practical and tangible and you know, concretely helpful.
Yeah.
But you know, it takes someone like you to bring that awareness to them.
Is it appropriate to have someone come with you, like at an appointment, Ryan? Like,
Yeah, so one of the things Jess on our team does is she'll do phone calls with the benefits or the HR department. So a lot of times they provide you a number, but a lot of times as clients, we don't know what questions to ask. So Jess or myself will jump on phone calls with an HR department. And we did this yesterday on a retirement account that was going to pass on to a spouse. And we weren't sure exactly what the provisions were, and we just asked clarifying questions with the spouse. And then we get to the right solution, right?
Yep.
It's measured twice, cut once.
Yep.
So yes, we're able to do that.
And you're also saying, you know, Aunt Sue, you know, she's my, what did you say, recording secretary. Can she come along?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes. Right?
Well, I think, you know, and two, kind of pulling the estate plan piece into it, like, so every estate plan has, you know, basic documents. There's healthcare directives, power of attorney, and at least a will, some sort of vehicle that actually transfers the property post-death. But in order for that post-death transfer to happen the way you want to happen, you have to keep the plan intact while you're still alive. So that's where the healthcare directive and the financial power of attorney come into place, because you need to have that advisor who can, you know, if you end up in the hospital and you can't get bills paid, or you need to make phone calls to insurance companies or banks because you're going through financial planning to try to figure out what your situation looks like, having somebody who can do that on your behalf. And so it's not just we're waiting for, you know, Joe to get out of the hospital so that he can actually make this phone call. It's having somebody who can kind of step into your place, you know, because that's what, you know, we're talking about finances today. So the financial power of attorney, it grants the authority to another individual to basically act on your behalf or in your shoes in making financial transactions, you know. And a lot of times in Minnesota, we give broad powers, we create flexibility, especially with spouses, because, you know, not everybody titles everything jointly, you know, or there's leftover accounts that weren't retitled once you got married, you know. So when you have you know, the spouse who can step in and say, hey, I need to call the bank because my wife has a 401k and we decided that we need to take an early distribution because we have this bill or whatever. You know, having that in place can help make it so much easier. Then it can also help keep all of your other assets intact so that if you do end up passing away, they can pass away according to how you actually want them to pass. So, and I guess one thing that I was curious about, because you know the power of attorney can grant so much broad power. You know, I don't know if either of you have had much experience actually advising people to use them or using them in conversations with banks. But you know, the way that I always explain, especially the power of attorney piece, is, you know, if something happens and an account needs 2 signatures to be dealt with, well then, you know, the sick spouse who's on the couch, like, she doesn't have to go to the appointment, or he doesn't have to go to the appointment. You know, the caregiver who's named the attorney in fact can just make both those signatures for both of them. So I don't know if you guys have had much experience working with that document in particular.
Well, not a little bit experience on that document in particular, but I think about it now as a parent of 2, right? And what I hear from clients, like my biggest worry, now we have an estate plan, but my biggest worry is making it easy for my kids if Katie, myself, something happens to us, and that goes to the proactive planning around estate planning, but making it easy for them, but also making it easy for Katie if I wasn't here. And one of the things just, you know, probably is helpful, we learned this lesson over the last 2 years with different illnesses. We lost 3 clients last year. And there's just dynamics amongst families when that happens. So I'm probably going, if
Sure.
it turns into terminal, but there's a lot of dynamics.
Yeah.
And it's messy. And you don't know where accounts are. And everyone's kind of fighting, even if they say they aren't going to fight for assets. And one of the biggest questions, and what I have really studied up on, is what happens to accounts, right? So if I lose a spouse, or if I pass away, like, what happens to the accounts? And there's probably 4 main accounts that we think of. Number 1 would be if I have liquidity, or I said liquidity again, but broke access to something that's considered in the taxable world. We're going to receive that, get a step up on the basis, which just means we inherit it at a certain point. We won't owe taxes at that point. If we sell any investments at that time, we'll owe taxes. Life insurance proceeds, and the life insurance is always polarizing, but what I've learned in 15 years of doing this is it's a saving grace, and life insurance is completely tax-free when you leave it, outside of estate tax issues, which right now Minnesota has a large exemption, federal has a large exemption, so life insurance proceeds are tax-free. Where a lot of confusion happens is especially on qualified money, or IRAs, or 401ks. You have a lot of options that you can do. So I could, if my spouse leaves me a 401k, I could bring it into my own IRA. I could do what's called a spousal inherited IRA, which means I'll have certain RMDs in the future. So there's a lot of different ways that you receive assets from a qualified plan. Typically, though, it's going to be an inherited IRA. Then there's real estate. So you know, one of the things that we get a lot of questions on is, how should I have my house titled? Like, how does that work?
Yeah.
That's a question we get all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that generally, especially if you have younger families, that's like their biggest asset is the house. And so that's like the big thing. Well, what do we do with the house when we're creating a plan? And you know, there's different trains of thoughts in the world of estate planning attorneys. A lot of times, one of the options is to create a revocable trust that you can then title the house into. So to take a step back, one of the kind of presumptions that a lot of estate planning attorneys use is if you have a married couple, the goal is to minimize administrative expense on the death of the first one. And then once that first one dies, you need to revisit it anyways, and then you kind of figure out what to do with the survivor, with the surviving spouse. So one way that you reduce the administrative expense of a death is you try to avoid the probate process, which it's kind of like a scary world, or a scary word in terms of estate planning. I feel like every single client is like, there's this thing, it's called probate, and I know it's bad, and we need to avoid it.
Yeah, it sounds like probation.
So what do we
That's
do?
not good.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and it's scary, it's work. Minnesota, relatively speaking, has a pretty straightforward process, but it'll still cost, you know, at least a few $1,000s, even with the most basic of basic, you know, estates. So do you want to create a trust, which you then title your assets to, connect them to, so that they don't have to go through that probate process, which is a common goal? Or you can use transfer on death deeds, and, you know, transfer on death designations that you can use for other cash accounts and stuff like that. But in terms of real estate, it's, well, again, it's very situational. You want it to be a relatively simple situation where you have like one kid, maybe two kids, you know, but you can create the transfer on death deed, which attaches to your recorded deeds, so that when you pass away, it, in a very simplistic sense, kind of creates a beneficiary designation for your house. So then, rather than, you know, if you think about it, when you pass away, all of your property something has to happen to it.
Yeah.
So what we do is we create a box, and all of your property goes into the box, and that's what passes through probate. So by creating a trust ahead of time, you're kind of creating that box while you're alive, and you're deciding, well, which property should I put in the box so that it doesn't have to go through the probate process.
Right.
You know, and that's, at the end of the day, estate planning can be so extremely flexible. It often comes down to how much time and expense are you willing to put into this process. It's good for some people. For some people, they just don't care. You know, they're not worried about it. They say, well, when I die, I'm not going to be here, so, you know, I'm not worried about that. And then the other thing about, you know, having a trust is that you have to manage it while you're alive too. So there is some work involved there too. And that's just why, you know, it's good to have an attorney and advisor who can sit down and communicate. You know, I think it's you know, at the end of the day, when you're creating an estate plan, whether it's using a trust or using, you know, transfer on death deeds for your house, all of these things that you're setting up, you're really just creating like a tool. You're creating a tool that will facilitate the transfer of your stuff, the transfer of you when you pass away. You know, but I know Ryan's mentioned it, you know, the idea is that communication are the instructions for that tool. And the more you can communicate with your family, the people who are in your life that are going to benefit or be impacted by this planning that you're doing, the better. Because then you don't have, like, we did a case study when I was in school where there was basically a custody dispute over a sentimental piece of furniture. It was like grandma used to rock the grandbabies in the rocking chair, and then she died, and all the kids wanted the rocking chair. And like they literally went to court over the rocking chair.
Wow.
And so it's like the more you can talk to your kids, your family, you know, who really cares about getting grandma's ring, or who really cares about getting the hunting rifles? Like,
Yeah.
if you can have those conversations, the earlier the better, because that can help you with planning and making sure that things are going where you want them to go and where they're actually wanted. You know, another conversation that's too big for today is, you know, family cabins. That's just like, if you have a family cabin, you need to talk to somebody about it.
Right.
Because that's huge.
Yeah.
So just,
Well, and a question I'd like to address that I suspect our audience has, I know I would if I was watching this back during my caregiving journey, is because, you know, we're talking about houses, the title. Well, what about renters who are like just trying to make rent
sure.
for next month, and that's their biggest headache, is like, we could be out on the street. How do we afford a team like this? You know, I can't afford what I've already got going on. And I see these smart, well-educated, well-dressed people in a fancy office, and I say to myself, that must be nice. Right.
Yeah.
And so how do you respond to that concern?
I mean, I think that it can be intimidating. It was intimidating for me and my wife when we first, started doing our planning. But most estate planning attorneys will do an initial consultation at no cost. They'll be able to at least give you a baseline of what they think the actual financial cost would be and what kind of work could be done. In terms of the estate planning piece, like I said, it can be super flexible. If you just are in a triage situation, like, you don't have to do the full estate planning package. You can focus on titling and seeing what can we do to figure out how to get our assets past post-death with minimal effort. And ideally, you find an attorney who is willing to do that with you and is willing to kind of walk that road with you.
Right, Lindy, I think you can.
Yeah, and that's why Cancer Legal Care was started, is because people do not have the funds to hire an attorney. And the vast majority of our clients who come to us are qualify for pro bono services, and the number one issue that they have is estate planning. So we are, for clients who come to us and are under 300% of the federal poverty guidelines, which is, based on your household size, we're able to provide those services at no charge to do a simple will, and the documents that Dustin was describing, the power of attorney, and with one of our volunteer attorneys, if we're able to locate those services, that's what we do. So that's, but I would also say is that it's very what I alluded to earlier, it's paralyzing because it's so intimidating, and there's so many documents, and it's so hard because you think, people I'm sure that are listening are like, I don't have all this, I don't have all these assets, I don't understand all this. And so a lot of what we do at Cancer Legal Care is people will call us and say, this is how we own our house, it's held jointly, my wife is dying, she's just started hospice, we have this, we have that, and they'll sit with one of our estate planning attorneys, and they may say, what you have right now is probably okay, and it's not worth the time with where your wife is to spend the precious time you have together to do all this. So,
right, like Dustin said, triage.
Triaging it, yes, ideally everybody should have a will and have all this done, but it's a risk-benefit analysis, and when people are at end stage of life and in hospice and in and out of capacity, we can't do any of this estate planning. If someone does not have the capacity to make these decisions, we can't. It's too late for us to, as attorneys, come in and do it. So it is better to do it ahead. But lots of times, if everything is held jointly, it's going to be okay. And if you do have to go through some probate, it's going to be okay. It's better that you spend your time with your loved one at the end. So, I would just say to people, call us at Cancer Legal Care and we will help you figure out the next steps. I mean, what we do is a lot of triaging of these very issues. Or people will call us right at the beginning of diagnosis and say, I don't even know what I don't know. And we do a legal health checkup and we go through all these different things, and they'll say, okay, I'm going to talk to HR and I'm going to find out, I'm going to make sure all of my assets are titled the right way, and my beneficiaries who I named 17 years ago are still the people I want to be my beneficiaries. Yeah. I mean, you've just got to start where you are, and that's all anyone can do ever, but especially in this situation. You just have to start where you are, and I think all of us just want to say that there are people and organizations to help you do that, and you don't have to be alone like our friend at the table you read. It doesn't have to be a lonely experience.
Right. And Ryan, how would you respond to the cost concern?
I would echo what Lindy and Dustin have said. One of the things clients tell us on the backside that we help them with is being an advocate, and what that means and how they define it is, Ryan, you just help me think through a controllable each day, right? Because it is overwhelming. You don't want to look under the rock, but you know you have to, but then it gets bigger, that rock, because everything's piling up. And you know, sometimes we'll just meet with clients up front and there's no fee to do that, just like the two of you were saying. And it's more of just, it's an hour conversation, and a lot of it's more the anxiety, the mental side, like where do I even start? And that's where, more than anything, we're helping coach them around, you know, if it's one controllable today, what's one thing you could look at today? What's one phone call you can make? All right, you know, consistency compounds. So, all right, if I did that today, I won the day. On a financial side, what's the second thing I can do? What do I need to tackle? What's the third thing that I need to tackle? So that's just one component. And then the second component is figuring out, as we need more funds, what's our strategy? Where do we go on these different buckets? Do we have our disability claims in place? Are we going to our cash buckets? All right, maybe we need to start liquidating some of the taxable investment account. Maybe we have to look at the a line of credit right now, which lines of credit, if you can manage it, it's not a bad option if you need some short-term liquidity, right? So I would echo what Lindy says, is up front, it's just talking through and putting together a plan on how we're gonna address this. You didn't ask the question, but I always think about, I put myself in clients' shoes, and I think about like, what prevents people reaching out to us, right? And I think about like, I gave the example of me reaching out to my doctor for a 1-year medical checkup. The reason I may defer that is maybe I feel inadequate, maybe I have some skeletons around my health that I don't want to share with my doctor. Maybe it just seems so overwhelming where to go down mail, just too much. I just feel like a lot of that, we make up those different narratives, and to overcome that, you know, the last thing I want to do is pass judgment in a conversation. My role is to ask the right questions so that we can have a positive outcome. So,
well, and I can tell you one of those emotions is that, you know, like you said, Lindy, there's an event usually that triggers us to get serious about all this. And in this case, for the people watching, most of them, that event is a cancer diagnosis. And one of the things we hear over and over in our group gatherings is, I can't give up. You know, so the emotional layer that we're dealing with, and each one of you has an experience. You know, it's one thing to say, these are all the things you need to know, but I'm sure as when your caregiving hat was put on, that emotional layer made it much harder to actually engage. And so what we like to say to caregivers is, being prepared is not giving up. Because that's what it feels like sometimes, to get into these conversations. Well, that just means I'm saying the treatment's not gonna work, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's not the same. This being prepared, I was never prepared. I didn't do like 98% of the things we're talking about here, right? I think that's another important thing to mention is, you will be okay, you know, regardless, I believe. But I didn't, you know, I cashed out 401ks. I didn't call Orion. That was the biggest bucket of money, and I got penalized, and I didn't know, that was the way to solve the problem in my head. And I could have been better prepared for that, and I could have faced, you know, fewer consequences. But I think that you guys have been fabulous. Like, this is exactly what we were hoping for, and we're so grateful to each one of you. I think everyone in the audience has probably realized, like we said, we're just kind of peering down into not one rabbit hole, but maybe like 18 of them, and they're deep. And so, like, I know the mantra for cancer legal care, I don't know if it still is, but it used to be, you need an attorney on your healthcare team. Well, you need a financial advisor on your healthcare team, just like you need a doctor and you need all these people. And so we encourage you to reach out. I'd like to ask each of you to just mention the best way to get in touch with you, and how would they, or your organization?
Cancer Legal Care, it would just be either on our website at cancerlegalcare.org. You can schedule an appointment there online, or you can call us at 651-917-9000 and speak with one of our wonderful attorneys there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lindy.
Yeah, and so my firm, North Star Legacy Law, I have a website, which is just northstarlegacylaw.com. You can go there and pick a time on my calendar to schedule an hour conversation to get a baseline, or you can email me directly at dustin@northstarlegacylaw.com.
Thank you. All right.
Awesome. So there's 3 different ways. I actually just have personal experience. Kyle just introduced me as someone that was struggling with a couple things, and that client just sent a note to Kyle. Kyle kind of brokered just the introduction. So if you have any questions, going to Kyle, not to put more on your plate. The other 2 ways, I have a website. We have a team of 9 people on my team. But if you go to ryan.brockhaus@nm.com, you can look up all my information and background. And then the easiest number to reach me at is 651-289-6523.
Awesome. Thank you, each of you. And in closing, we'd like to ask you to consider becoming a donor to help us celebrate caregivers on National Caregivers Day, and by helping us reach our goal of 22 donations in celebration of 2022. That support will enable us to keep doing this important work. And if you're watching next week or next month, it's never too late to become a donor. Simply visit jackscaregiverco.org/donate. We're humbled by your participation today, by everyone's participation. And for those of you who spent your time and tuned in and watched, for our panelists who shared their wisdom with us today, for our host today, Northwestern Mutual, we're here in, where are we? What town are we in?
Mendota Heights.
Mendota Heights, thank you. I should know that. I punched it into the machine. And for our presenting sponsor, AARP, and above all, we are so grateful for Sarah Maines and Alan Christensen, who are our producers in the background. They're like caregivers. They're quietly doing all the things in the shadows and made this happen. And again, I just want to express gratitude for those of you who do choose to become donors today. We're so grateful for you. Thank you.